now. So H.P. Grice is basically talks about implicature, which is not only what your mouth and what your lips actually form as words, but also what you actually mean with the words that you say. He's talking about the four maxims: quality, quantity, relation, and manner. Um, he's covering the basics of the underlying meaning of what you say, and I would say that also covers kind of your body language, so how you actually communicate. Um, to me, it gives some kind of effectiveness and manners in communication as far as language goes, but also not only what is said, but also what is meant. What I have taken away from the readings and from this assignment is that not only personal observation, but also see that our language has changed constantly, and it still does. Um, language forms within groups mostly and spreads culturally. I was doing a christening the other day, and it actually dawned on me that it was a Catholic christening, and I have never been in a Catholic church before. So this was completely new to me, but it dawned on me that their way of communication internally is how they understand each other, and they used a bit different language and other words than I would normally use, and what I see in my Christian church. And that would be the same in a Muslim or a Buddhist church or in a Indian tribe in South America. So each local group of people will tend to form their own language, and that language can evolve. So one word can mean something at some point in time, but the more people use that word can actually change its meaning. I also learned that we learn from a very early age, and I actually didn't know that we are receptive to any and all languages at that early age. Actually, when I started this education, I was wondering why some people weren't better at speaking English, but I've learned since then that there are actually more non-native English speakers in the world than there are native English speakers, which means that not only do you have Canadian English, North American English, you have British English, South African English, you have Indian English and Australian English. You also have these speakers of the world that speak English as their secondary language. So the basics is that we all know the words, and as long as we can understand each other and we use the same words, that forms a good enough ground for us to be able to communicate. Um, dialects do die out, but both new words, new languages, and new dialects form all the time. And the youth are mostly responsible for changing the language because they sort of invent and implement and spread new words that some oftentimes get implemented into our daily language. As I said before, words can form, words can have a meaning, but that meaning can change, and oftentimes words will become obsolete. For example, the word phone booth. We all know what a phone booth is, but we rarely use that word because the phone booth itself has become obsolete. Um, and that was pretty much it for me. So thank you for your time, and I think we should go to the discussion now. There must be something I've done wrong. Thank you. Oh my God.
Such a long hour.
Yeah, I know. Sorry.
Yep.
I
Take it
really,
away.
really learned a lot from this assignment. I really did. I feel like I'm always wondering and being curious, but this assignment really taught me something new and made me not question, but really understand why and how we communicate in the first way in a whole new perspective.
Oh.
So That was really helpful and very, very meaningful, and gave some learnings to me.
You said in the beginning that you think that the older people used the dialect more than the younger people now. Why do you think is that?
I think that's more of a, I don't know, but my observation is that older people the older generation tend to have stayed in the same geographical place for most of their lives. It was not normal 200 years ago, 100 years ago, 80 years ago to move far away from where you were born and raised. And I believe that that's why some dialects are still are the way they are. But now it's completely normal for younger people to move to mostly bigger cities or move abroad or go traveling, which enables them to hear new language or hear new words and learn new words. And oftentimes, some dialects will be mocked or looked down upon, and then the youth will adapt to wherever they are. For example, if you come from, I don't know, Western Jutland, and you move to Copenhagen, the Copenhagen people will mock you for speaking this sort of Danish, and then the younger people will tend to adapt to speaking more like a Copenhagen dialect, whereas their parents or the grandparents from back home in the Western Jutland will still speak Jysk, as we say. um, it's not something that I can back up. It's just what I've discovered or my own personal experience.
I have a question as well.
Oh my
It's a
God.
bit similar to Teresa's, but you mentioned in the end that youth, they are responsible for actually implementing the language all
Yeah.
the time. So have you recognized any changes since the times when you were younger, like
Yeah.
18th or something, and right
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's hard for me to translate, but in the 80s there was a term. Danish people said "bred ymer." It doesn't mean anything, but it's kind of a word for, like, in the 80s in California, for example, you would say rad. That is rad, and rad was slang for something that was cool or awesome. And rad is just completely ancient now. No people use it, not even the youth. Um, you can hear from a person, if that person was alive back then, they would sometimes still use the word, but it's just ancient. And the younger generation now really adapt fast. I don't feel 37, but when I'm with you people, I can sometimes feel that I'm not 25 anymore, because some of the words that you use or some of the technology, you can actually kind of adapt a theory to technology. For example, Snapchat enables people to communicate in a new way, and some of the words that are being used and invented were not around 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So there are a lot of words that become obsolete. For example, rad. It's short for radical, which is another way of saying cool or awesome, but it's just a word that you don't use anymore.
Thank you, Jimmy.
You're welcome.
I have a question too.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's an observation. Perhaps I would like to have your opinion on.
Yeah.
It's about Chomsky said in his video
Yeah.
that in some way thinking is talking to yourself,
Yeah.
like in your mind, and I think he's on the track. I mean, we just touched the surface in the philosophy of language, which is really extensive, and
Yeah.
it's a lot of things to read and do. But he would go into this idea that we have some kind of language instinct, that we
Yeah.
sort of have he calls it a universal grammar that sort of
Exactly.
makes it able to cope with things. And then we have Wittgenstein's beetle.
Yeah.
Which is in the literature called the private language argument, which is basically the idea that we cannot have a language on our own, all alone.
Yeah.
But here is my confusion. Is that not what Chomsky says? when he says that thinking is talking to yourself, in my reading, but perhaps I'm wrong, this is exactly what he says. So who's right?
Well, I think that when you think and when you talk to yourself, you think and talk to yourself in whatever language you have as your native language. Um, I wouldn't agree that you talk to yourself in a undiscovered or completely individual language that no one else than you speaks. If that's what your
Okay.
question is,
It
I
is.
don't.
It is,
So
and
how can you know?
I'm really happy about your reply, Jimmy, because it gives me the opportunity to point this out. If this is true, it means that a baby
Yeah.
does not have thoughts before it has learned language.
Yeah.
Yes, I
Is that
wanted to
true?
say that.
All
This
right. Okay. I'm sorry,
literally,
Kapita. Yeah, exactly.
no, this
Is
is
that true?
literally how it is. I was thinking all the time. Baby kind of talks in his own known language
Yeah.
because he doesn't know the exact language yet, you know. And this is like,
But that does it mean it can't think?
no, he can, but he has his kind of own language way then.
But that's
Until
not
he.
possible according to Wittgenstein.
When
I think it's possible.
when you and I, Peter, were talking about what I was supposed, what you thought I should read, you actually mentioned at one point that if an alien comes down to Earth, we wouldn't understand them and they wouldn't understand us, but we each have our separate language that are individual to our species. We, as far as I don't know, as the investigation goes, I don't think that a dog doesn't have a language. It barks, but it understands other dogs barking. I don't think a deer definitely can't talk, but it can communicate, and it doesn't have thoughts in the way that we believe thought is. But our explanation to how the world works is how we see it with our mind and how we, with the rules that we have set up for investigating how the world works, then we can explain, well, a dog doesn't talk. But if you could read into the mind of a dog, that dog can actually communicate with other dogs. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have thoughts. It just works in another way than we humans can explain. So a baby, I would say, maybe does have thoughts, but it doesn't talk to itself in its mind because it hasn't evolved any kind of language. Maybe it works in shapes or sizes or colors. I don't know.
All right. Okay.
And the Wittgenstein theory is more, as far as I understand it, it's more the description of how you understand what a cat is. If I say the word cat, we are now five people in this conversation, and I'm sure that we all have a five individual thoughts of what a cat is because we have the association with what we are used to a cat being. I think of a gray cat. You might think of a white cat. Gabby, I might be thinking of a long-haired cat, but it's still a cat. And that's the basics of what I understand as the beetle in the box. We all know what a cat is, but we have different determinations of what that cat is or how it looks. We can also take this into our eyesight. We all know that grass is green. What we see when we look into the yard, grass is green. But do we actually see the same hue or shade of green? That's hard to explain, but we all know that grass is green. Even if you're colorblind, you know that grass is green. Or the sky is blue and so on.
Actually, I read some articles that it's impossible for you to explain colors to the blind person because you can't.
Exactly.
if they never saw it.
And in one of the videos, the guy also says that even if a kid has two deaf parents, they will blabber in sign language because you are receptive whatever input you're being presented towards. So I would say, as far as my investigation goes, if you had a kid from two deaf parents or like two deaf parents, but they were both speaking, and the one parent was African and the other parent was Chinese, that child would both be able to, they would be receptive to both sign language and African and Chinese, and it would be fluent because it would be just like pouring water into a bowl. It would be completely receptive. and be a natural in all these three languages, you can say, or ways of communicating. That's my understanding, at least.
I think more questions, comments, because then I would stop the. Yeah, Kabija.
Just wanted to say that I really enjoyed this topic. I really liked it.
Thank you.
I'll stop the recording and then we'll give some feedback, I think.
Thank you.